Welcome, everyone. It is October 7th, and welcome to the Helm Community Call. And as usual, we follow the CNCF community guidelines, and we'll start with announcements, and then we have a whole bunch of discussion topics, so we will get moving on those. And see that Scott is back. Welcome back, Scott. And Bridget, I see that you have some announcements. Would you like to go ahead and get started on canceling next week's Dev call?
Yeah, just letting folks know we're not going to have this call at this time, this bat channel next week. We are going to have two office hours related to KubeCon. So if you're not at KubeCon in person, then go ahead and sign up for those office hours on Bevy. RSVP to them. You'll get a link. You can join, participate there. But that's what we're going to have next week instead of this call. So just giving everyone a heads up about that.
Awesome. Thank you. And I see you have another announcement there. If anybody has an announcement, please put it into the notes. And if you have any discussion topics, please put those in the notes as well. Bridget did drop the link into the chat, so thank you for that. And then your other announcement, Bridget.
Yep, my other one is basically I'm just throwing the ball to Farina and saying, Farina, you want to tell us about 3.7.1?
Sure. We're cutting a release on Wednesday, right in the middle of the conference, because there's enough of us who aren't in attendance. We can do that. And we have a number of things in, some more that'll go in. I think a bunch of them are around the OCI work, but we have stuff and we'll be cutting a release.
That is excellent.
Matt. Mark.
Yeah, I just noticed there's two needs pick from Fisher. And should we remind them that the new process to make your life easier should be to
pick them? Yes. Pick and push. Yes, that would be a wonderful thing if somebody wants to Pokemon. I noticed that this morning myself, but I have not had a time to do it. I've spent most of the day so far.
I'll send them a message.
Thank you.
Does it make sense to talk about this new pick and push process a little bit more, or are we?
I mean, sure. The new process is pretty simple. When something gets merged into main, if it's going to go in a patch release, the person who merges it in a main should then do the patch release, right? Or should then pick the change over to the release branch and push that up in the release branch. So the tip of that branch is always up to date with what might go out. So if anybody decides to check that out and test it along the way, they have whatever will be in the next patch release and it's ready to go. It makes it a lot easier for somebody who's going to go cut that patch release. Like if there were 20 things that were in a patch release, the person who was there before would spend a whole bunch of time at patch release time cherry picking those over. And then that was the first time that they were all in there together to see that it was working and to test it. And this way, along the way, we can see and test, which is a good thing.
That is a good thing. Thank you. And I see, Joe, you have a quick question on the release.
Yeah, I was wondering, and I asked this in total ignorance of the process, and that's kind of why I ask it. Since you're doing it during the conference, is there any chance that you could maybe do it as like a demo of this is how Helm actually cuts a release? Like during office hours or something?
So we cut it on Wednesday, and I don't think we have office hours on Wednesday, do we?
You're running the ones Tuesday, and I think Martin's running the ones Friday. So
yes, and Tuesday I'm going to use some of my time to make sure everything's ready to go because I can't do that on Monday, so I won't be ready at that time to cut a release. And
do you want to show some of the release prep during the office hours?
Yeah, I think that would be
good.
Cool.
I mean, so the process, and I can do that, is actually documented up on our site in the docs. So if anybody does want to ever follow along, this is mostly up to date. I think this is the release checklist, and this walks through how we release and all the different types of things and ways we do it, the commands we use, all that jazz is up there.
So alternatively, what if you did a screen capture while you were just running through cutting a release and then recorded it and shared it? Just, you know, putting that out as a thought.
So there's this point after I push it up and get everything and push the tag up, and then I walk away for 20 minutes or half an hour while Circle CI does its thing, because the release takes a really long time for Circle CI. It's actually gotten longer. It used to be like 5 minutes and now it's like 30. And so I just walk away and come back. So it's not going to be a nice screen capture or a nice screencast, because that's just what happens.
I mean, we could press pause, but maybe it is nice to have all of that captured too. Just so
Yeah.
that-
We'll see how Wednesday goes.
Okay. All right. Does
Good idea.
anybody else? Does anybody else have any announcements? Okay. Then moving to discussions. I see that we have Nick Remen. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm going to butcher your name. So if you'd like to talk about the surfacing container logs topic, are you here? Nick?
I'm sorry, I'm here. I'm not sure whether or not people can hear me. I'm still trying to adjust Zoom settings.
We can
We
hear you
can.
now.
Yeah. Now we can. Yes.
So my name's Nick Jennings. I'm with Microsoft. I work for a team that does partner support for a number of large Microsoft services. And we've just sort of migrated a bunch of our partners to Azure Kubernetes services and Helm deployments. And part of our tooling uses this Microsoft internal like compliant release pipeline. That pipeline runs Helm installation commands for us and like runs Helm in a container and then surfaces the installation results back to us. So basically everything is done in these sort of like air gapped temporary containers so that like we don't have access to like the Helm binaries, we don't have access to logs like directly. Everything is just surfaced back to us through a web portal. One of the major issues that our partners are facing is when we run Helm installations and say like our pods don't start up correctly, all we see back is essentially like this message that says timed out waiting for condition. So basically all we see back from our tooling is the status message that Helm itself returns, which is not super useful for our debugging. I mean, generally when we see that, it means, okay, great, like we have to go dig into some stuff. But we're hoping that there's some way that we could capture more like rich logs through Helm into the actual containers or pods that are failing to start up. So like one big problem we have is like if we try and use atomic rollbacks with Helm and something fails to start up, like those logs are just gone for us. Like the Helm will roll back the changes, and unless we've noticed that the Helm installation isn't finishing like within the first couple of minutes, logged on to the AKS cluster, grabbed logs from the actual container, then they're just gone by the time we realize that Helm is rolled back.
So let me ask you a quick question. Is this for testing purposes or is this for more than that?
I mean, this is, like people's either like test int deployments or sometimes even their production deployments. Like it all depends on where something, goes wrong in the deployment process for them.
Yeah. So as of today, Helm does not have something that will get you all of that information. What you might want to look at though for ideas is there's a project called chart testing. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I have not.
So this is a project that lets you do testing of your charts, and it does everything from linting to even going above and beyond with the kinds of fields you want and then testing for that. And it has the ability to test a chart right? This was originally designed out of when we had the charts repository, and the Helm project had its own system, and we needed to test it. We broke it out separately for other people to use it. It even has the ability to test a chart against multiple configurations. And one of the things we always wanted to do was get logs and information for those same kinds of problems. So buried in the source here, we actually do a bunch of that work where we query for those logs so we can display them in CI pipelines when you're actually running tests. And so this may give a source for inspiration of what you could add to yours. It used to be shell scripts. Now it's written in Go. But we do that kind of thing in here. And so it may serve for some inspiration for what you could add to your pipeline in order to get that information without us needing to do anything. So that's the first thing, just to make it easy on you without us being a blocker in the way. And so this was the first thing that came to mind.
So it would be hard for at least my team to be able to do this. It would be easier for our deployment, like release pipeline tooling team to be able to do something like that, because they would at least have a window into what the deployment is doing and like whether or not it seems stalled, and then to also go access that cluster. Like my team doesn't have access to any of our partners' AKS clusters for somewhat obvious reasons. But in our talks with them, they're like, well, we don't want to do anything custom. Like we want you to go talk to the Helm team and see what Helm can support natively, so that they don't have to do work, and that it just becomes something that everybody can take advantage of. And so if the answer was there is nothing that Helm can do, then we would obviously go back to our release team and see what they could like custom implement. But
so in this case, our process for something like this would be somebody has to propose. We don't have this as a feature today.
Yep.
And so somebody would have to propose the feature, and would probably be somebody who wants to also work on implementing it, because this is open source. You've got people who want to scratch their own itches. Somebody has to have the desire to go work on this and to go do this. And so we have something called the Helm improvement proposal process, which is a good place to start, or you can start with an issue in the queue, but this kind of thing would probably need to end up being there. And let me drop a link into that process.
So I see that Bridget dropped something into the chat too.
Yep.
I dropped in the link that was already in the agenda. I'm sure Verena's getting to that, but I'm kind of wondering if picking up and resuming that stalled PR would solve some of this, or if you think that's out of scope.
Well, this is not going to provide logs, and what they're looking for is something more detailed. This will supply the status of resources, and I think we definitely need to get this in. But to get the log information when something goes wrong is more complicated than that. And so I think that at least I'm seeing them as two separate things. Am I right in saying that, Nick?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, like just knowing what failed, like that if like a container was in some sort of failed state, like would be sort of, step one. But then understanding, like trying to retrieve pod logs or something would, be the sort of like next logical step for this to help you debug. Like, okay, now that I know what the status is, why is it in that status?
Yeah. And I mean, the ways to go to have a Helm command that just does that is something that would need a Helm improvement proposal process, and we'd have to work through it. And then somebody would have to implement the code if it was approved. A lot of this stuff we tend to say implement in user space though. So you'd get a list of all the resources that are part of it, which is the pull request Bridget pulled up that is stalled. And I would love to see this in not just text form, but in something like YAML or JSON form that you could pipe into something else and then go over the logs for each thing. Because that's something then you could more easily script yourself to say, okay, for each of these that failed, or each of these give me the kubectl logs for it. But then you still end up with things in your own user space. I don't think your exact use case is going to be something that Helm ends up fully implementing, but that's for kind of a hip to figure out.
And yeah, I guess the problem with that would be like atomic rollbacks, where Helm has said, well, this command timed out, now I'm going to go undo everything. Like if it's not something that's baked into Helm, then how do I run those commands in my own space before Helm has gone and undone the chart installation.
Yeah, and so that's the kind of thing where I would say bring that all up in a HIP, but we're also going to be looking for people to code and work on that as well.
Mhm.
So
Because
Matt,
it's an open source project. Yeah.
and Joe mentioned in chat that it could be a plugin without a HIP. Joe, do you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean, I know that we've added the ability to check and see which resources, to check the readiness state of all the resources. We exposed it in the library so that it could be done, but there's nothing been done toward that. So you could actually make a plugin that would walk that, see which resources are not ready, dump your logs, and go from there. I don't know if you could do it within the atomic loop, but you could if you made your own command. So
Yeah, and the command is exposed. All the commands are exposed in the action package. So if somebody wanted to do it, but I think one of the things Nick was looking for was not doing something custom, and that just becomes hard to solve this problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's one of the things talked about last week or the week before is things like this, things that are this much of a change. Start out with something custom. Start out with a plugin, see how it works, see if it gets adoption, and once it's refined, then it becomes a HIP. Is
That's a good way to do things? Yeah,
I kind of agree with that as well. Just certainly the ability for us or whoever ends up implementing something like this would be a lot easier to play around with and debug. I think as a separate plugin, as opposed to making underlying changes to Helm itself and then just constantly having to recompile binaries.
Although I think that what I find interesting is that I think you have a legitimate use case for this. I don't know, Farina, what you think. I think it's justified that there's a case that Helm needs to provide more support because we're stuck, or Nick is stuck. And
yes, and I mean the workaround for this is we've got the atomic flags. It's really to not use them. It's instead to no. I mean the trick is to do is an install, check, then if the resources came up, if not, print the logs and then do a rollback yourself. It's essentially walking around it. It's kind of that pull here, right? Because if you look at the Unix philosophy, it's do one thing that does things well. And trying to fit everything with all these flags into one single command, not a chain of things that you put together, really goes against the Unix philosophy. And so it's hard for us. And it also increases complexity. Go look at the complexity of the install command with things like atomic. It's so hard to test. It's so complicated. Adding more complexity to that actually makes it harder to work on the code. So the ability to have things that chain together well makes the experience far simpler for us to implement, for people to use, and it's a lot less bugs. And so that's why we like that. Adding all this complexity and more flags to a single command is just really hard to do. In fact, now the code's complex enough that some people go in there and they just get headaches trying to work through it and make sure everything works.
plus, where are you going to store all those logs? You can't show them in the same secrets. There's just a lot of times there's just not room.
You'd have to dump all the logs to standard out is what you'd end up doing. Yeah.
That's a great discussion. Nick, I'm wondering, do you feel comfortable in what your next steps are going to be?
Well, so I mean, certainly we're not using Atomic we're telling all of our partners not to use Atomic until they're extremely comfortable that everything is going to deploy without issue. Or you're going to have to run multiple deployments where you run Atomic, you see it fails, then you have to go run another deployment without the Atomic flag so that you will have logs by the time you go to investigate. So at least in that sense, we do have some partner workarounds. We're trying to minimize the number of times that partners have to essentially elevate and get admin access to clusters, which is another reason that we're trying to figure out how to get these surfaced so that they don't need to elevate and then log onto the cluster and then retrieve the logs. So I mean, it sounds like our next steps would either be to file a HIP or to implement this as a plugin. And the first step would seem to be, could we build something in outside of the atomic flow? Since that sounds like it would be easier. That like, could a command be built such that if a resource was in like a bad state, like maybe the first step is get whatever this show resource names pull request committed, so that Helm, through Helm, you could at least query the state of failed resources, and then if a resource was failed, see what it looks like to implement a command that could retrieve logs for a failed resource.
Yeah, and the chart testing project may give you some inspiration on how to do some of this, because a bunch of work's been done over there already around testing together those failed logs.
Okay, well, let's close out this topic, and Nick, if you can, it'll be interesting to see what you come back with. And Tom, you have a topic, and I love that you put in your proposal. Do you want to go ahead and talk about annotations?
Sure, thank you. We have two particular use cases where we want to better tie the images needed by a Helm chart back to the Helm chart itself. One is for bill of material generation, and the other is we do several air gap deployments where we need to bundle all of our artifacts together and kind of bring them across a network gap. And we want to know, a priori what images are needed. So we wanted to try to find some community standards that have this kind of annotation out there. We saw Artifact Hub has their own. It looks very branded towards Artifact Hub, and we were just trying to propose a more generic, agnostic solution for providing annotations as a default for identifying the images needed by a Helm chart. So I put an example there. For the bill of materials, we also wanted to identify any additional CPEs that are part of the package potentially as we build it up and generate that. But the primary one I want to talk about today was just the images annotation, just to see thoughts, feelings on whether we could standardize that.
I'm very interested in both topics, both the SBOM and air gaps. I have a lot of customers that are in air gap environments, and this is critical. From a Red Hat perspective, we use some metadata. So we do a lot of things with operators. We use metadata on the operators to know what images we need to mirror to disconnected environments. So doing it via an annotation or something native sounds aligns very well.
And you guys put that as your metadata on the operator framework package? As part
Yeah,
of
we
your
use it. We
hosting?
put it on what they call the CSV, the cluster service version. So it's similar.
And do you have a key that you use for those?
Yes, there is. There's a related, we call related images.
What was the key? Related images?
Yeah, I
And
can
it's-
I can add the document, the link to the documentation.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Just for an example.
Okay.
I would definitely second or third, I guess at this point. Excuse me. Having a standard in Helm. I mean, we already have recommended annotations, or let's just say supported annotations. In order to do this, the Helm project wouldn't actually need, I believe anyway, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't actually need to do anything special except for say, yes, this is a supported annotation that we recommend people use.
Yeah, there isn't anything special we would necessarily have to do, but we would have to agree to it and then document it.
Yep. And I'm happy to fulfill that documentation merge request and kind of bring that in. But I wanted to get like some conversations going about whether this was in the spirit of Helm or this was the right annotation.
So for the images one, so I work on Artifact Hub too, and that project did it because Helm didn't have any, right? And so it was a lack of it. This is one of those things that would definitely need to be a Helm improvement proposal, a HIP, and it's one I would be supportive of. We've talked about different ways of handling this over time, but that's where it would start, and then we'd get the requisite approvals. I don't see images being an issue where people would have a problem with that. And so if you wanted to create a HIP, that I think that would be wonderful, and images make sense.
Fantastic. I see a lot of Artifact Hub, and it looks like the Red Hat docs also have name as well as image as part of this list. Does that provide value, or what is the use of the name field inside of the images list that is being used?
Well, I can't speak for the Red Hat one, but on the, let's see, do we have it listed? In the, that's a good question what the name of it is for. I will have to go back because everybody's just referring to the image everywhere. The one that I know Artifact needs is the whitelisting one, because it depends on whether it's displayed in the security reports or not. And sometimes if something's built out of a scratch image, things like that, people might want to whitelist it so it doesn't show up as not a bad. They're just general reasons people do that, especially in their own. So that's the one part that would be up for discussion. The name, I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, from the Red Hat side, the name is used to trigger a related images field, the way they do it internally. So that it knows that there's an internal convention related _ images _ that name. It will then trigger. There's some internal tooling around that. I'll have to find the documentation, but there is some reasoning behind that.
Okay.
On Artifact Hub, I'll tell you, they list the container images by their name. There's a place we're listing that now, where they'll just give you the name of the images inside, and they will use the name field in order to do that for display purposes.
Okay. That seems fine to continue to support.
Yeah.
So with 1 minute, 1 minute to go, Tom, I'm assuming you're going to go off and start writing the HIP, and then you'll get feedback. All right, notes, moderator or triage for 2 weeks from now. I put my name under notes, but if somebody else wants to delete my name, go ahead and put yourself in. So again, moderator for next time. All right. We'll start volunteering people then. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And
Sabrina, sorry, one real quick second. Bridget had mentioned about next week, but I didn't put a note about it. I just put the date for next week. Are we saying we're canceling? We're canceling this because of KubeCon?
Yeah, no meeting next week. So the hard part here, I don't know if anybody can do triage the whole 2 weeks. I'm out for part of it, but I'm willing to do triage for the time that I'm around when I'm not traveling, even though I won't be at KubeCon. So if somebody else also has time, in particular the week after next, to do some triaging stuff, that would be awesome.
cool.
Okay, so you can do triage for the next week, and then the following week we need to get someone else.
Yes.
Okay.
That gives us days and days to figure it out.
Right. Okay. Well, we are at time. We will figure out moderator and the second triage person. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see some of you at KubeCon next week, and we'll see everybody else the week after. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.